This is the second lecture of week 7. And again, you can listen to this as an audio if you want. And again, please read Exodus 2 to 3 before you listen to this lecture. So when we left off, Moses was introduced in Exodus 2 as a kind of special, holy, royal figure raised in Pharaoh's court, destined to become the new savior, leader for a new people, Israel. When we get to Exodus 3 and 4, however, we see a different conflicting portrayal of Moses, okay? But before we get there, we need a trigger to place Moses in a new context, okay? So that he can get the divine call that will make him famous. And this trigger is found in Exodus 2, verses 11 through 15, where it states that Moses sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, identifies with the Hebrew, right? The poor, the afflicted, his own oppressed group, and therefore kills the oppressor. And when he is discovered in killing the oppressor, he has to flee. And in doing this, Moses, like Joseph, remember Joseph's original kind of outburst of his dreams, okay? Moses at this state, we are shown, is depicted as immature and lacking wisdom. So he needs to kind of go out there, experience a larger world, undergo some testing, and now will come back as a mature leader. Okay. Moses shares other similarities to Joseph as well as to the other patriarchs and heroes of Israel before him that we've seen. And to see, where these similarities occur, take a look at what happens after Moses flees. And this is found in Exodus 2, verses 15 going forward. But Moses fled from Pharaoh, and he settled in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. And the priests of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But some shepherds came and drove them away, and Moses got up and came to their defense and watered their flock. And when they returned to their father Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come back so soon today?" And they said, "An Egyptian helped us against the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." And he said to his daughter, "Where is he? Why did you leave the man? Invite him to break bread." And Moses agreed to stay with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah in marriage, and she bore a son, and he named him Gershom, for he said, "I have been a ger, an alien, an immigrant, residing in a foreign land." And after a long time, the king of Egypt died, and the Israelites groaned under their slavery and cried out. Out of the slavery, their cry rose to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and God looked upon the Israelites, and God took notice of them. So lots of stuff going on here. Like Jacob, and to kind of a lesser degree Isaac, right? Remember Isaac used a servant. Moses meets his future wife at a well, okay, symbolic of life-giving water and fertility, okay? In this rare instance, not only is the woman whom Moses marries, not only is she named Zipporah, but her father is named as well, right? And even identified as a priest of Midian, okay? Which all seems to indicate how important this figure is. Indeed, the priest of Midian, who becomes related to Moses, he becomes so important that he will be given 3 different names in the biblical text. In Exodus 3 and throughout the Exodus text, he will be called Jethro. In Judges 1 and 4, he is also called Hobab. You see here in the text that I just read, he's called Reuel. We don't know what it, all this seems to hint the multiplicity of names, that this figure was extremely important to the newly forming Israelite group. Exactly how, there's guesses, but but certainly the emphasis on the name is important. Okay, notice that Zipporah, nor Jethro, Reuel, Hobab, whoever, notice that they're not Israelites, and it's not a problem here. Again, the biblical text will go back and forth as to whether they care or not care about Israelites marrying outside their own group, okay? Indeed, many scholars do wonder if Zipporah and the father-in-law here were part of a nomadic tribe associated with a group called the Shashu, who appear in these ancient Near Eastern text letters and so forth, okay? Now, the Israelite relationship with the Midianites here seem quite good, very intertwined. Later in the Hebrew Bible, by the time of Judges, the relationship seems to have deteriorated, okay? So maybe the back and forth about, the exogamy, endogamy focus depends on, what the relationship Israel had with the foreign country was like at that moment that it was written. Okay. Finally, similar to Joseph, notice how Moses, who is kind of exiled from Egypt and certainly exiled from Israel, names his son Gershom, which sounds a lot like the word ger, which means stranger or alien or foreigner or an immigrant. And notice how this emphasizes his outsider status. Remember that before in the Joseph narrative, Joseph also named his sons, Manasseh and Ephraim to try to forget his father's house. Okay. This kind of outsider emphasis of Moses, this becomes important. Indeed, one of the articles that I gave you argues that, Moses, insofar as he becomes symbolic of Israel, right, or the nation of Israel, really speaks to the outsider, the self-identification of Israel as a kind of outsider figure. Okay, maybe this is a variant of the underdog theme that we've seen. At the end of chapter 2, we are told that God suddenly, for whatever reason that we're not told why, he remembers the Israelites. Okay, and why God waits so long, and what causes him to remember now? This is all kind of theologically problematic questions that are raised. Okay, and indeed, as I said before in earlier videos, the story about Abraham and Sarah's kind of issues in with Pharaoh in Genesis, right? Remember, they get stuck, God strikes Pharaoh with a plague. That may be a replay of the Exodus, and the replay itself might be centered on trying to explain why God waits so long to rescue his people. Okay, by showing you, well, this is some part of like an ordained divine plan that we don't know the answer to. Okay. Now, notice that it states suddenly that God remembered his people, and, in the biblical text, you don't have the same internal-external divide, right? So when you remember something, it's not just internal, right? Something external, some activity is going to follow, okay? This means that God is about to do something. And, of course, this is what happens, because in the very next chapter, in Exodus 3, we are told that Moses gets his famous call. Okay, and this is chapter 3, verse 1 following. Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Horeb will become synonymous or called Sinai later. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the bush, and he looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. And then Moses said, I must turn aside and look at this great sight and see why the bush is not burned up. And when the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Hineni, here I am. And then he said, come no closer, remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said further, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. The cry of the Israelites have now come to me. I have also seen how the Egyptians oppressed them. So come, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Okay, so quite a call narrative. While shepherding one day, Moses goes up a particular mountain, which he shouldn't do, because mountains or hills or mountains being high is usually where a deity resides, right? Take, for example, Mount Olympus. Okay, and lo and behold, he goes up a mountain and he encounters probably the divine being that kind of resides on that mountain. Okay, notice that again in Exodus 3, an angel and God flicker in and out of identity. Okay, and he encounters this God on this mountain via a bush that is burning but not burned up. Okay, and this particular vision of God hints again that this God Yahweh, okay, who will be identified later, is a kind of storm God. And indeed, in much of the book of Exodus and the text going forward, the God of Israel will be imagined less as the God of the fathers, right, and more as a storm God. Okay, the God of the fathers, remember, was kind of like a God who was the head of a local clan or a family. Here, God is a kind of larger storm desert deity. Okay, we are told initially that Moses refuses this call. Understandable, as he has just met this bush deity, and who knows who he is, right? This refusal, and Moses will keep refusing, okay, angering God and so forth, okay. This refusal signals that there's a kind of new, different portrayal of Moses, right, than the one that we've seen in Exodus 1 and 2. In those chapters, in Exodus 1 and 2, Moses is, as I argued, presented as a kind of royal, divine royal figure, okay. Remember, he's raised in the court of Pharaoh, okay. Here, this denial of his call will help to portray him, Moses, as a kind of prophet, okay. And a prophet is literally somebody who is called, okay. In other words, a spokesman for God, okay. And prophets frequently, especially real prophets, frequently resisted their call, okay. And the reason why they did so, in part, is because this was a way to authenticate oneself, okay. So in the biblical text, there's a big question: how do you tell a true prophet from a false prophet? Okay, and well, one of the ways you could tell is a true prophet would have wanted this job in the first place, right? Instead, he, didn't want to do it, but he was forced into it by God. So this becomes a kind of way to say, I'm actually a real prophet, not a false prophet. Okay, so when Moses refuses, this kind of fits into that trope. Okay. Moses, realizing that God is not letting him kind of refuse nicely, he tries a different tactic, okay, to get God to back off in verses 13, okay. But Moses said to God, if I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask, what is his name? What should I tell them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said further, thus you shall say to the Israelites, I am has sent you. And God also said to Moses, thus you shall say to the Israelites, the Lord, Yahweh, or Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my title for all generations. Go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, God of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have given heed to you and to what you have done, what has been done to you in Egypt. Okay, so and really the meanings of this particular section is much more apparent in the Hebrew. Okay, so Moses says to God, or to the burning bush, wait, but if I go to the Israelites, they're going to ask who sent me, which God. Notice there's lots of God in this universe. Okay, and so they're going to ask which God sent you. Okay, and so he says, what should I tell them? And here, when Moses asks this question, God starts to kind of hem and haw a bit. Remember that the name of Israel's God translated in your biblical text as the Lord in small caps. Okay, whenever you see the Lord in the Hebrew, it says Yahweh or Yod Vav Hey Vav. Okay, and the Vav, if you know Hebrew, can be pronounced Wa, according to the kind of one set of pronunciations, or more commonly is pronounced va. Okay, so the name of Israel's God is Yahweh or Yahweh. Okay, and really we don't know exactly how it's pronounced because in Hebrew we only have consonants. Okay, and these four consonants that signify God's name will be called the Tetragrammaton. Okay, so again, we don't know what it exactly sounded like as we only have consonants, okay? But what we know is that this ha, va, wa, this ha, va, wa, this sound is repeated, okay? And interestingly, when God is kind of hemming and hawing in verses 13 and following, you see the repetition of these very same sounds, okay? God, when asked this question about what his name is, he kind of first tries to skirt around his name, both in sound and what he says, by cryptically saying, I am who I am. That is, in Hebrew, Ehyeh, Asher Ehyeh, right? Notice how similar it sounds to his name, but not exactly like his name, okay? God, however, seems to think kind of better of it, right? And attempts, tries to give out his name a little bit, or gets closer a little bit in the next verse, okay? He's, by saying, I am Ehyeh, has sent me to you, okay? So he says, Ehyeh, Asher Ehyeh, and then he says, Ehyeh, and then finally he gives his name, Yahweh, okay, or Yahweh. Okay. Notice that God seems not super eager to give out his name. Okay. Why? Again, we've seen this before. Okay. With Jacob and the wrestling scene. Remember there, Jacob says to his wrestling partner, "What's your name?" And he says, "Why do you want to know my name?" And doesn't really give it out, right? Again, if you know someone's name, if names in the biblical world says something essential about you, then by knowing someone's name, you can maybe obtain power over them. Okay, and so God too recognizes this, does not seem very eager to give out his name, though he finally does. Okay, and what this kind of hemming and hawing, what really it brings out is how Yahweh or Yahweh, okay, or notice how in this little pericope, right? In trying to give out Yahweh's name, these consonants, the ya, the h, the v, the w, okay, notice how they're repeated all over this little section, okay? And so, and all of these sound plays kind of help scholars figure out what Yahweh's name might have actually meant. Okay, all of Hebrew is based on the triconsonantal system. I'm not going to go into that right now, but yeah, you can ask Gregory. A lot of scholars think that undergirding Yahweh's name is the root haya. Okay, and what haya means in Hebrew is to be, to become, to come into existence. Okay, basically this is a root, or this is a word that signifies being present or being alive. Okay, and notice that it's onomatopoeic. It sounds like the word breath, haya, hava. It's the sound you make when you exist or you're breathing. Okay, notice how this word sounds awfully similar to another word, hava or haya. Okay, and the w, the v, the ya actually are interchangeable sounds in Hebrew. Sometimes they take the place of one of the other. And if you're taking Hebrew, well, and haya, okay, or chava, we've seen chava before. Chava means to live or to breathe. And this is the name or the word that is the name of Eve. Remember in Genesis, 2, way back, Eve is named Chava, right? Why? Or to be alive or to breathe. Why? Because she is the mother of all things living. Notice how similar Chava sounds like Hava or Yava, which is Yahweh's name. Again, leading people to speculate that maybe God had a pair, that God, this was a divine pair. Okay, okay. All this is to say, Yahweh is a kind of creator deity, right? A deity that causes things to come into being, to be present, to be alive, okay? Indeed, scholars posit that Yahweh is kind of a shortened form, shortened name for a longer name, a longer epithet. So like, Richard the Lionheart will be, maybe called just Rich, or Dick for short, okay? So Yahweh similarly is short for, and again, there's a hypothesis, for this longer epithet, he who causes to come into being the hosts or stars of heaven. Okay, and this host of heaven were kind of an army. the stars were seen as an army of an astral deity. So this is a kind of creator astral deity that's imagined. Okay, and now that we got Yahweh's name figured out, okay, notice the other strange thing that's going on in this conversation. Okay, and it's this, why is Moses asking Yahweh to identify himself to Moses and to the Israelites in the first place? It's been a while, certainly. But, isn't Yahweh the God of the Israelites? And so why would he need to identify himself to his own people? Okay, why can't Moses just go to the Israelites and say, oh yeah, our God, the one we've been worshiping for like a long time, that guy who's been kind of silent for a while, left us alone, this whole slavery thing. Well, he's finally decided to do something about this oppression thing we've been suffering. Why doesn't Moses do that? Why does he have to have God identify himself, as if Moses and the Israelites have no freaking clue who this God is, right? Who this God who has just identified himself as the God of the Israelite patriarchs, Abe, Isaac, Jacob, that this God is unknown to the Israelites in Egypt. Okay, so what's going on? Most scholars think that the reason why the Israelites do not seem to know this God that's introduced in Exodus, Yahweh, is because he is actually a whole new deity. different from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which the patriarchs of Israel were worshiping. Okay, this new God, Yahweh, is a life-giving storm deity. Okay, that a famous Israelite hero called Moses picks up in Midian, probably from Jethro, Reuel, Hobah, his father-in-law. Remember, who is a priestess, okay, or priest of Midian, likely a priest of Yahweh. Okay, and that this new God Yahweh was merged or combined with this earlier God of the fathers, or the God of the patriarchs, you know, in the traditions. Okay, notice that Moses encounters Yahweh in Midian, not in Israel. Okay, notice a repeated mention of how his father-in-law is priest of Midian. Like I said, probably a priest of Yahweh. Notice how Moses and the Israelites seem confused about who this God they need in this bush is. Okay, all of this points to the idea that Yahweh is not really the same God as the God of Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac. Okay, and that this text in Exodus 3 is the point at which the merging is happening. Okay. Indeed, we have some archaeological and textual evidence for the fact that Yahweh was probably a new god. In a 14th century Egyptian list, there is, interestingly or coincidentally, an area in Midian. Where Midian is debated. Most people say Northwest Arabian Peninsula. Some say the desert regions near Petra, near Edom. It's debated, okay? But there is an area in this Egyptian list called YHWH. Okay, where a group of nomadic people called the Shashu, of which the Midianites were a part, where they lived. Okay, and Yahweh sounds awfully similar to Yahweh. Okay, there is moreover other evidence from the oldest parts of the Hebrew Bible. So in these very old poetic parts, Deuteronomy 33 verse 2 and Judges 5:4, you get these hints that when God's about to do something, he has to like travel to Israel. He has to travel southwest from his actual house to do stuff in Israel. Okay, and this kind of southwesterly direction seems to indicate that his real house is in the lands of Edom or Midian. Okay, again, all hinting that Yahweh was probably a Midianite, Edomite desert storm deity that was originally worshipped by a group of nomadic people, maybe the Shashu, okay, of which the Midianites were a part. This worship of this deity Yahweh was passed to Moses, maybe from Jethro in Midian, and later merged with the God of the patriarchs, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who was a different deity to become, right? So they take these two gods, squish them together in the text to become the God of the Israelites that we know today, okay? And whom the text talks about and names as Yahweh. Okay, this may be good news or bad news, I don't know. You know, the bad news, people are always disturbed when I do this lecture. You know, the bad news is, I guess Yahweh is not originally an Israelite deity. Actually, the Israelite people might not be originally Israelite either, as I'll kind of go on to explain. The good news is, however, undergirding the biblical text, again, might be some remnants of something historical, something of what really happened. Okay, notice how even in a text that's been worked through, that there are hints of what may have truly happened in history, okay, depending on what you assume about the biblical text. Okay, and for more on what happens to Moses, turn to the next video.